We pray and ask God for help. Heal my wife. Provide the finances that we need in this emergency. You wait and you wait. And when God finally shows up, it appears he's too late. And at that point, you have a choice. How could a good God allow so much suffering in the world? If God truly is all loving, why wouldn't he want to stop people's suffering? And if he's all powerful, then he could stop it. But why hasn't he? Is God not as all loving and powerful as he says he is? Is he powerful enough but too cruel to do anything? Or is all this suffering just proof that God doesn't exist after all? To understand suffering, we need to ask ourselves another question. We need to ask, what kind of universe are we living in? If we're living in a universe where suffering is just a natural and normal part of life, if things have always been like this, if pain and suffering and death are just how things are, then we should just learn to deal with it. But what if suffering isn't normal and natural? What if it isn't a normal and natural part of life? What if there's something bigger going on? What if we're living in a universe that's broken, a universe that's gone terribly wrong somehow? In Genesis chapter 1, verses 1 through 30, the Bible describes how God created the heavens, earth, and mankind. Then in verse 31 it says, God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. You see, we are not accidents of evolution. A loving God created the universe purposely to be a perfect home for mankind. And in the beginning, it was very good. The first thing that we need to understand is that the world was never meant to be filled with pain, suffering, and death. Pain and suffering are not normal and natural, which leads us to ask the question, then, what went wrong? Well, if we go to Genesis chapter 2, in verses 16 and 17, God said to Adam and Eve, he said, from any tree of the garden you may eat freely, but from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. So, in that beautiful garden, God planted a lot of trees. They could eat from all the trees, including the tree of life, but they were not to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Choosing to disobey would lead to suffering and death. Now, you may wonder what the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was doing in a very good world. We understand how all the other trees were very good and were expressions of God's love and goodness. But the tree of the knowledge of good and evil in a very good garden, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Well, I want to show you that even that tree was an expression of God's love and God's goodness. You see, the fruit on the trees were not magical or poisonous. The fact is, the emphasis and focus of the passage is not on the trees at all. The focus was on Adam and Eve's choice. You see, genuine and real love is always a choice. God loved Adam and Eve. However, God is not going to make them love him back. Forced love is not love at all. He created them with a free will and gave them a choice. They can freely choose to love God or not. The choice, not the trees, was the focus. Well, as you know, Adam and Eve chose to disobey God. But then the question comes, why should we have to live in a world full of suffering just because of Adam and Eve's choice? Well, the Bible teaches us that sin was passed down to all of us. Genesis 3 paints a picture of what all of us are like. We all make the same choice and freely decide to go our own way. Right now, all around the world, things are going wrong. People are in trouble. They're suffering and dying. We ask ourselves, Is our suffering a sign that God has abandoned us? Or is there something bigger going on? You remember the story of Lazarus and his sisters, Mary and Martha? When Lazarus had become seriously ill, his sisters sent for Jesus. They knew that if anyone could help Lazarus, Jesus could. Jesus gets their message, and in John chapter 11, verses 5 and 6, it says, "Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So, when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was." Interesting, isn't it? Now, you would think that if Jesus cared and loved them like he said, he would have immediately gone to Lazarus and his sisters. Notice the little word in verse 6, so, S-O. It says he loved them, so he stayed where he was. It doesn't just say he stayed where he was. It says he loved them, and because he loved them, he stayed 2 more days before he went. His delaying to go immediately was an expression of his love for Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. But how was that an expression of his love? Well, as you know, by the time Jesus gets to Bethany, Lazarus is dead. His body's in a tomb. Mary and Martha are grieving. They're heartbroken. And they said out loud what everybody else was thinking in verse 21. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Now, you and I, we know the end of the story. Lazarus is going to be resurrected. Mary and Martha didn't need to panic and grieve and everything. Everything's going to be fine. But here's the thing. Mary and Martha were in the middle of the story. They didn't know the end of the story. You see, from our perspective, everything Jesus did made perfect sense. To Mary and Martha, who were in the middle of the story, nothing made sense. Mary and Martha had a plan for how they thought things should go. Jesus had a different plan. And so Mary and Martha had to wait 2 days for Jesus to come. They waited and they waited, not knowing the end of the story. And you see, that's the problem that we face in our own lives. We're stuck in the middle of our story. We can't see the full picture of what God's doing and what he's going to do. And what makes it even harder for us is Jesus' plans and timetable are different than ours. We ask God for help, we ask God for healing, but so often we just have to wait for Jesus to show up and do what he chooses to do when he chooses to do it. And when Jesus finally shows up, and certainly with Mary and Martha, Martha said, "If you had been here, our brother would not have died." In other words, she was saying, "Jesus, you're late. It's too late. You can't do anything." We pray and ask God for help. Heal my wife. Provide the finances that we need in this emergency. And you wait and you wait. And when God finally shows up, it appears like he's just too late. And at that point, you have a choice. You can choose to accuse God of being mean, uncaring, and cruel, or you can choose to keep trusting and wait to see what he's going to do next. Just like Adam and Eve, you will make a choice.